The gavel cracked against the judge's desk, sharp as a rifle shot, and just like that, his marriage, his dignity, his years of labor were dissolved. The courthouse smelled of pine boards and stale sweat, yet it was her perfume that clung sharpest in his nose, sweet and mocking. She didn't weep. She didn't even hide her smirk. Instead, she laughed. It wasn't loud, but it was cruel enough to cut through the murmurs of townsfolk gathered in the benches. That laugh would follow him longer than the ink drying on the papers. She was radiant in her silk dress, rings flashing under the high windows, while he stood stripped down to his weather-worn coat and dust-stained boots. Once she had leaned on his arm as though he were her whole world. Now she looked at him like he was little more than a fool. "The ranch?" she whispered to one of her friends as they stepped out of the courtroom, her laughter bubbling again. "That ruin? Let him keep it. He'll starve out there before the summer's done." He heard every word. He tipped his hat low, hiding his eyes, and walked into the glaring sun. The courthouse door swung shut behind him, and with me years of partnership that had begun in passion and ended in scorn. His name was Elias Boone, and for the first time in a long time, he was entirely alone. The dust rose as wagon wheels rattled down the street, the townsfolk pretending not to stare. Pride kept his back straight, but inside he carried a hollow ache. She had taken a house in town, the money in the bank, even his best horse. All he had left was a ranch on the far edge of the prairie. The place she now mocked, the place he himself hadn't set eyes on in near a year. Yet when the sun struck the horizon that evening, Elias turned his mare toward it, toward the ruin, toward the land where his story had begun, and where it would have to begin again. It took a day and a half's ride to reach the ranch. The trail narrowed past dry gulches, through stands of cottonwood that whispered in the wind like restless ghosts. Elias rode in silence, the rhythm of hooves steady beneath him. Every mile carried him further from laughter and closer to memory. When the homestead finally came into view, his chest tightened. The ranch sprawled across the valley floor, but where once it had boasted tall fences, fat cattle, and barns red as blood, now it lay in neglect. The roof sagged on the main house, shutters banging loose in the wind. The corral posts leaned like old men ready to topple. Weeds pushed through the dirt yard, swallowing what had once been pathways worn smooth by boot and hoof. Elias dismounted slowly, boots sinking into dust. The silence was wrong. No lowing cattle, no clatter of tools, no voices, just the sigh of the wind. He walked the yard, his hand brushing the rough timber of the barn. Memory struck him. His father hammering nails into these beams, his wife smiling in the doorway when they first arrived, the sound of calves bawling in spring. Each memory clashed against the reality before him. Rot, ruin, emptiness. Inside, the house was worse. Floorboards warped, windows cracked, the hearth where they had once gathered cold as stone. In the corner, a trunk sat half covered in dust. He lifted the lid. Inside, molded blankets, broken harness, scraps of old ledgers. Nothing of value. He closed it gently, jaw tight. The ex-wife's voice echoed in his head. He'll starve out there before the summer's done. Maybe she was right. That night, Elias lit a small fire on the hearth and ate hardtack with a cup of bitter coffee. The flames threw shadows across the walls, making the room seem smaller, emptier. He tried to push away thoughts of her new life in town, the laughter, the fine clothes, the smug certainty that she'd seen the last of him. But the fire had a way of pulling memories from a man, and Elias sat staring at the flames until his eyes burned. He remembered the promises he'd made when he bought this ranch, that it would be a place of legacy, a place to raise children, a place that would stand strong no matter what the world threw at them. And now it was nothing but bones and dust. Morning came sharp and golden. Elias woke stiff on the floor, brushed ash from his coat, and stepped outside. The sun revealed more ruin than the night had hidden. Fence lines broken, troughs dry. Coyotes had scattered bones across the yard. The ranch was bleeding out, and it would take more than sweat to stitch it back together. He set to work anyway. Pride demanded it. He pulled weeds, patched leaks in the roof, mended a section of fence. His hands blistered. His back screamed. Still he worked until the shadows stretched long. Each task felt like pouring water into a cracked jug, effort wasted on something too broken to hold. Late that afternoon, while clearing the barn, Elias's boot struck something hollow. He knelt and brushed aside straw and dirt. A floorboard loose. Prying it up, he revealed a narrow cavity. Inside lay a bundle wrapped in oilskin. Dust caked it thick, but when he pulled the knot loose, a scatter of papers slid free. Maps, ledgers, letters with his father's name scrawled across them. His hands trembled as he unfolded one. It spoke of land rights, of surveys never filed with the county, of veins of black oil seeping under the earth, deeds, numbers, values that made his head spin. 20 million. He sat back hard, the breath leaving him. The barn smelled of hay and rot, but all Elias could feel was the weight of that figure pressing against his chest. $20 million, buried in ink and signatures, tied to land everyone else thought worthless. The ranch wasn't ruin. It was a treasure chest in disguise. He laughed then, not loud, not cruel like hers, but sharp and startled. For the first time in months, laughter came from his own mouth. Evening fell. He tucked the papers back into the oilskin, sealed them tight, and replaced the board. The secret was his now and his alone. When he walked back into the house, shoulders square, steps firm, something had shifted. He still had nothing in the bank, no cattle, no wife, no comfort. But he had land. He had secrets written in his father's hand. He had fire kindling inside him stronger than any flame in the hearth. And as night gathered over the valley, Elias Boone knew this. He might have lost a marriage, but he had not lost himself. The ex-wife's laughter would not be the last word. The next days blurred into one another, filled with sweat, blisters, and silence. Elias Boone rose before dawn, worked until the sun dropped, and still the ranch seemed like a wounded beast refusing to heal. Yet every night, before he let the fire die, he knelt in the barn and lifted that floorboard just to touch the bundle of papers again, just to make sure it was real. The oilskin was stiff, the ink faded, but the figures never changed. $20 million. Not in coin he could hold, not in cattle he could sell, but in oil and land and rights that no one else had bothered to claim. It was as though his father had left him a weapon hidden in plain sight, waiting for the day Elias was desperate enough to find it. The thought both burned and steadied him. By day, he was still the man the town laughed at, the man his ex-wife dismissed as a failure. But by night, when the fire crackled low and the stars crowded the black sky, he felt like a man carrying dynamite in his chest. One spark, and the whole valley might change. It gave his work new purpose. He patched fences not just to hold cattle, but to hold a future. He repaired the roof not to keep rain out, but to keep Hope, Indiana. Every nail driven was a statement. This land is not dead. Not yet. But secrets have a way of drawing eyes. By the 5th day, he noticed tracks near his corral. Hoof prints. Fresh. The cattle he had left. Thin, half-wild creatures. Shifted nervously at night. Someone had been circling, watching. He kept his rifle close, though his cartridges were few. That evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, Elias caught sight of a rider on the ridge. A dark figure against the fire-colored sky. Watching. Then gone. Elias spat in the dust. Trouble was coming. It didn't take long for word to spread. The rancher was back. He was patching fences, mending roofs, driving himself like a man with something to prove. In town, the gossip swelled. At the saloon, men leaned over their whiskey, whispering that maybe Boone had found something out there. A man doesn't break his back on a dead ranch without reason. And in the corner of that saloon, sipping a glass of sherry, sat Clara Boone, Elias's ex-wife, draped in satin, laughing at her new husband's jokes. She pricked her ears when she heard his name. "He's a fool," she said lightly, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. "The place is dust. Always was. Always will be." But her mind wouldn't let it rest. By the end of the week, Clara herself rode out with her new husband, a man named Barstow, who wore his mustache like a banner and carried his wealth like a weapon. They rode up the ridge above the ranch, peering down at Elias, swinging an axe, sweat streaking his back. Clara's laughter was quieter this time. "He's working harder than any mansion on a graveyard," Barstow muttered. But his eyes narrowed. "He's building, not just patching." building. Suspicion flared. By the time they returned to town, Clara's curiosity had sharpened into something colder. She had given up this land, mocked him. But if Elias Boone had found a reason to rise from ruin, she would find out too. That night, Elias woke to the sound of splintering wood. He grabbed his rifle and rushed outside. The corral gate lay smashed, his thin cattle scattering into the darkness. He caught the flicker of lanterns moving fast. Saboteurs, men hired to tear down what little he'd rebuilt. "Get out of my yard," Elias bellowed, firing a warning shot into the night. The saboteurs fired back. Bullets tore through the dry air, kicking dust at his boots. Elias dug behind the trough, returned fire with a sharp crack that echoed off the hills. Horses shrieked. Men cursed. For a moment, the yard became a war zone, shadows leaping with every muzzle flash. When the gun smoke cleared, they were gone, riding hard into the night, leaving his yard torn and his cattle scattered. Elias stood panting in the silence, fury pounding in his chest. They weren't just watching now. They were testing him. The next day, Elias found hoofprints leading north. Barstow's brand was burned into the horseshoes. It confirmed what he already knew. His ex-wife's new husband was behind the sabotage. He wanted Elias gone, wanted the land for himself, or maybe just wanted to see him crawl. Either way, the message was clear. Elias Boone was not welcome to rise. But Elias wasn't about to crawl. He doubled his efforts. He worked until his palms split and his knuckles bled. He rode the range, gathering cattle, setting traps for wolves, mending fences with a grim determination that seemed almost superhuman. Nights, he studied the papers by lantern light, memorizing deeds, tracing maps, whispering numbers like prayers. Yet the attacks continued. Poison in his well-won week. Fence posts chopped down the next. Every act designed to break him, to wear him thin. One night, as the moon rose cold and silver, Elias heard footsteps crunch outside the barn. He waited in the shadows, rifle in hand. When the door creaked open, he stepped forward. "Drop it." His voice was iron. A man froze in the doorway, a can of kerosene in one hand, a match in the other. His face was rough, a hired thug. "I said drop it." The man sneered. "Boone, you don't know when you're beat." The match struck. Flame flared bright. Elias fired. The shot rang through the barn. The thug dropping with a cry. The match snuffed in the dirt. The fire never caught. The barn remained standing. Elias stood over the man, chest heaving, smoke curling from the rifle barrel. For a long moment he thought of finishing it, of ending the threat here and now. But he lowered the rifle. "Tell Barstow," Elias said coldly, "this land is mine, and it's not for sale." He let the man limp away into the darkness. Later, Elias sat by the hearth, bruised and weary, staring into the flames. He thought of Clara's laughter, of Barstow's sneer, of the town's whispers. He thought of the papers hidden in the barn, the fortune humming beneath his boots. "This isn't ruin," he murmured aloud, voice steady. "This is foundation." The fire popped, sparks rising like stars. His reflection in the window looked harder now, sharper. Not the broken man who left the courthouse, but a man forged by fire and fury. The valley outside was still empty. The ranch was still scarred. But Elias Boone had found something more powerful than money or cattle. He had found resolve, and that resolve would burn hotter than oil. By autumn, the ranch no longer looked like a graveyard. Fences stood straight, rails new-hewn from timber Elias dragged down from the canyon. The barn's doors swung clean on their hinges, painted with a coat of red that glowed against the morning sun. Cattle moved slow and fat to the pasture, their hides slick and healthy. The creek he had dug wider carried steady water through the yard, and the sound of it was like a hymn. Elias Boone had rebuilt with nothing but his hands, a hammer, a rifle, and the secret fire that came from those papers hidden under the barn floorboards. He hadn't yet touched a fortune in oil, but the knowledge of it was enough. It was his power, his spine, his vision. The town had taken notice. Men who once muttered about his ruin now tipped their hats. Merchants who laughed when he asked for credit now sent wagons to his gate. Hired hands came, and Elias chose carefully, taking only men willing to work harder than they talked. In time, the yard filled with sweat, sawdust, and laughter. The place breathed again. But prosperity has a way of echoing where envy lives. One afternoon, as Elias walked the fence line with his foreman, dust rose on the horizon. A carriage creaked into view, polished and proud, the kind that didn't belong on rough ranch trails. It drew close, and Elias felt the knot in his gut before he saw her face. Clara. She stepped down, gloved hand resting on the arm of her husband, Barstow. Her eyes swept the ranch, the straight fences, the grazing cattle, the men at work. Surprise flickered, followed quickly by something sharper, darker. "Well," she said, her smile thin, "it seems you managed to keep the weeds down after all." Elias tipped his hat, silent. Barstow spoke next, voice oily. "Boone, fine place you've managed here. Shame you'll lose it soon enough." Elias's eyes narrowed. "This land's mine." Barstow chuckled. "For now. But a man should never build on sand. Things shift. Papers get misplaced. Claims change hands." Elias felt the weight of the oilskin papers heavy in his mind, safe where he'd hidden them deeper after the barn attack. Barstow didn't know the half of it, but he wanted to. Elias saw in his eyes the hunger of a man who already had wealth but wanted more because another man dared to keep it. Clara broke the silence. "You should have sold when you had the chance. All this work, it won't last. Men like you never hold on to anything. You build and the world takes it." Her words stung, though Elias did not let it show. Once he had loved her. Once he had believed her laughter meant joy, not cruelty. Now she stood before him, like a stranger, wearing the face of memory. "You'll see," Elias said evenly. "This ranch will stand longer than the both of you." Barstow sneered, but Clara's eyes lingered. For the first time, her laughter faltered. The trouble came to a head 2 weeks later. Elias had just finished loading hay when riders thundered into the yard. Barstow at their lead, Clara seated stiff in the carriage behind. With him came 3 armed men, rifles slung loose across their saddles. The ranch hands tensed, some reaching for tools, others for the rifles stacked near the barn. Barstow swung down from his horse, dust puffing around his boots. He carried papers in his hand, official-looking, stamped with a county seal. "This land," Barstow announced loud enough for every man to hear, "is mine now. Boone's been squatting on it long enough. Here's proof." He waved the papers like a flag. Elias stepped forward, jaw tight. "Forgery." "Proof," Barstow snapped. "Signed, sealed, and lawful. Sheriff's already been told. You're done here, Boone." Clara's face watched, unreadable. For the first time, her hands trembled slightly inside her gloves. Elias's men murmured, shifting uneasily. The weight of authority, of paper and seal, pressed on them. A rancher without law on his side was nothing more than a squatter with a dream. But Elias had more than dreams. "Hold," Elias told his men, voice steady. He turned, walked the barn with slow, deliberate steps. Every eye followed. He disappeared inside, then reemerged with a bundle of documents bound tight, the oilskin peeled away to reveal the faded ink of his father's hand, notarized and stamped with dates long before Barstow's forgery. "These," Elias said, holding them high, "are the true deeds, filed proper, signed by men dead long before Barstow learned to hold a pen." He laid them on the fence rail. The foreman stepped forward, eyes tracing the ink, nodding grim. "These are real." Barstow's face darkened. His men shifted uneasily. Clara's lips parted, her breath catching. "This ranch," Elias said, his voice cutting like a blade, "was bought honest, built honest. And no man, no paper, no snake in boots will take it from me." Barstow lunged as if to seize the deeds, but Elias's rifle was in his hands before the man's boots hit the dirt. The barrel gleamed on the sun. "Try it," Elias said coldly. For a moment, silence hung heavy. Only the creak of leather, the snort of a nervous horse, the wind in the grass. Then Barstow froze, his bluster bleeding away. His men looked to one another, uncertain, unwilling to die for another man's greed. Clara stepped down from the carriage, her eyes locked on Elias. For the first time, her voice was soft, almost pleading. "Elias, you can let it go. Take money, walk away. You don't have to." "I do." Elias cut her off. "Because this isn't about money. Not anymore." Her eyes filled with something, regret, maybe, or anger that she couldn't tell the difference. At last, Barstow spat in the dirt. "This ain't over." He turned, mounted his horse, and jerked his head. His men followed, reluctant. The carriage wheels groaned as Clara was pulled away, her face pale against the shadow of her bonnet. When the dust settled, the yard was silent. Elias lowered his rifle slowly, heart still pounding. Around him, his men let out breaths, some cheering softly, others shaking their heads at the narrow escape. Elias walked back to the fence rail, gathered the deeds, and tucked them close to his chest. For a long moment, he stood looking at the valley, at the land his father had chosen, at the soil that had fortune beneath its surface. Clara's laughter no longer echoed in his head. Instead, he heard the sound of hammers, the lowing of cattle, the steady rhythm of life returning. That night, by the fire, Elias sat with his men, sharing bread, coffee, and quiet. They spoke of the day, of Barstow's retreat, of the future they were building. And when the fire burned low, Elias lifted his gaze to the stars. He thought of what he'd lost. He thought of what he'd found. He thought of the woman who once mocked him and the man who tried to steal from him. And he thought of himself, not broken, not beaten, but stronger than he had ever been. Some men lose everything and vanish. Others lose everything and rise. Elias Boone had risen, and the valley would remember his name.